Welcome to the Climate Report. This is Hart Hagen. And so the purpose of the Climate Report is to actually solve the problem of climate change, all things considered. And an important part of that is the politics of it and the power dynamics of it. I have with me today Randall Daniel, chair of the Kentucky Libertarian Party. And I've had the privilege of getting to know Randall and other libertarians. And so we're going to talk about, on this episode, we're going to talk about just what's going on with the Kentucky Libertarian Party and go from there. Hi, Randall. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here.
So we met a couple of weeks ago via phone. Somebody wanted to hook us up because I'm in the Green Party, and you like Jeff Sebesta introduced us, and you were interested in talking about eminent domain, and we started talking about eminent domain, started talking about other things and other things and other things, and I found that you didn't fit the stereotype that I had in my mind of libertarians. And that's my problem. So, but tell us about what's going on with the Kentucky Libertarian Party. What's the status of things? What would you like for people to know?
Well, I'm going to touch on that stereotype aspect real quick. And I'm wearing a camo hat and a Green Day shirt. I've got a beard and a mohawk. I'm in politics and I dress like I'm homeless. But, well, I don't know. Stereotypes, I guess there's classics, they're tropes, but let's break as many of them as we can.
Sure.
I'm glad to change somebody's opinion, even if it just is the perception of what constitutes a libertarian. I think that a lot more people are libertarian. It's just that, the party's been pigeonholed or, marketed as one particular thing. Ultimately, if you believe that the government's too intrusive in your life, you're a libertarian. Mm-hmm. There's a whole spectrum of libertarianism. And I want to welcome as many people to it as possible. We're definitely going to need everyone we can get. And that ties into where the Libertarian Party is and where we're headed. Historically, the Libertarian Party has been primarily a think tank. It's something of, barroom philosophers sitting and drinking. And Hart kind of asked me this question 5 minutes ago on the call, and I gave him a little monologue on it. So I hope I don't bore him too much with the repeat, but I got him to laugh the first time. So there's a laugh the second, so I'm good.
Right.
But, we're really changing. We're becoming a lot more active. We're doing a lot more of our ground game. Here in Kentucky, we've failed to field political parties at the county level, build that grassroots infrastructure. Like every once in a while, you'll get a campaign of personality or a campaign of ego, somebody who's righteous and has a cause, and they'll build a following and they'll build a coalition, and they'll fight the good fight. And this is true of any third political party or any non-mainstream movement, right? But what happens is after they're done, after they've done their piece or said their piece or lost their fight, what's left, right? And that's where the party is starting to change. We're starting to build a coalition that lasts past the individual campaign, that's comprised of all of these unique people with their unique problems, where they're realizing that this one solution of government that's been taught to them since childhood is not necessarily the best solution to much of anything, if anything. And so it's, seeing libertarians put down their beer and their books and coming out to the public and, shaking hands and getting to know their neighbors. That's something that we haven't done in the past at the scale that we need to. And it's something that I hope to ramp up more and more in my term as chair. I was elected this prior March. We've seen a steady growth since. I hope we continue that growth trend for years to come. My focus has been on building those county level infrastructures. I got my start with the Libertarian Party because I, a single individual, had an issue with eminent domain. I had seen the cost, the detriment to my community, to my father, to my family, to my friends. And I saw more and more of it going on in my community as corporate and malicious interests, foreign governments, and bad actors come into my town and start throwing money from subsidies around so that they can seize property that's been in people's families for generations. It detriments the environment, it detriments the community, and it's all for short-term political benefit. And it didn't matter which political party was doing it. The one locally that was doing it likes to tote themselves as limited government, conservatives, and fiscally responsible, and I've never seen it from them. I'll hold off on railing on them too harshly, but the alternative to them was powerless. They didn't have anyone elected. They had no coalition. They had no power. They used to control everything, but then realized the community eventually realized that they were as bad as their worst fears, and they turned to the other. And
which party are you talking about?
Oh, so historically, Bullitt County, Kentucky had been led by the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Democrats sold them false promises for years and never really did much of anything. And eventually, here comes the Republicans saying limited government, this, that, and the other. But once they got into the office, they did the same sort of spending, same sort of expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I think my community is starting to realize that both of those parties don't represent them, their interests, and that it's just a cat and mouse, cup game of, where's the benefit, where's the power. And so I got involved with politics 4 years ago, over eminent domain. Reached out to some of my friends, reached out to anybody I could, trying to fight these issues. I reached out to Democrats, I reached out to Republicans, I went to city council meetings, fiscal court meetings. I went to about anything and everything I could find in order to find people that cared about this as much as I did, and cared about this as much as the people that were being affected by it. And I didn't really get any help from anyone that was involved in politics. A lot of them would shake your hand and say, yeah, we're here to help, we listen to your issue. But even the ones that want to champion the issue or say that they do, don't actually care or do anything about it.
Right.
And at the time, there wasn't a Libertarian Party in my county. In fact, my district meeting was the only one that was in, our organizational chart that covered my territory, and it was all the way down in Bowling Green. So I went down there and I met one guy, and his name was Chris Dillingham, and he was a great guy. And he told me that sounds like what you need is an independent political party. You need to coalesce, bring together your community, have an option to put those candidates on the ballot, to fight these people within the system, to push back against their policies and encroachments. And the Libertarian platform seems like it fits with your ideology. So I had always been, philosophically a libertarian my entire adult life and most of my teenage years since being aware of the term, but I had never been active with politics until that moment, until I was invited into the Libertarian Party by a single guy who I met at a bookstore that was supposed to be our district meeting. And he said, oh, this is an unusual attendance. We just don't happen to have anybody in your county specifically right now. So you're in luck that you've got a vacuum of opportunity, Mm-hmm. He didn't tell me that was, sure, it was a low attendance, one person, but, normally high attendance was 5 or 6. Mm-hmm. And, while we had county parties in the past, there wasn't any of them currently active. So I spun up my county with a few friends. We started, planning to run candidates, fielding money, doing what we could, doing city and county fair booths. And well, I went back to Chris and he's like, you're doing good work. You want to step up to the district chair role, and I'll do the same in my county. So then Chris got a few friends together and they spun up the Warren County Party. And then the Warren County guys got a few over in Barron, me and a few over in Hardin got that one up and going. And we've been going through county by county, spinning up as many as we can. The goal is to get all 120. An organization that's supposed to be bottom up really isn't fulfilled until it's filled in from the bottom up. Right. And the Libertarian Party has always touted itself as being a bottom up type organization. And yet we failed to organize the bottom. So now we're in that process and we're fielding persons and candidates and volunteers and activists and, at any level, if anyone wants to get engaged, I welcome them. If they just want to help us do legislative research, that's a key issue that we need to touch on. That's another failure of the party historically. If they just want to wave signs or tell their neighbors the good gospel of liberty and freedom, I welcome them aboard. But right now, our direction is county by county, person by person, conversations like this to talk to people about how government and force is not a solution.
Well, let me share with you a couple of reasons why I'm excited to have met you and started to network with Kentucky Libertarian Party. And then, I'm Green Party, and we're fairly small right now. And philosophically, I wouldn't be opposed to becoming libertarian, having found out what I have found out, like a couple of things. I know there's one major, to me, environment is everything. Like, I have three core values. One of them is environmental sustainability. Another is what you might call democracy. And the third is justice, which I define to be everybody has a fair chance, a fair share, and a fair shot. And, as part of those three things, I mean, I don't see either major party doing anything substantial, anything at all, to support the environment. And I see both major parties as being anti-democratic. And I see both major parties as supporting a system that is very class-based. It's like, if you have privilege, you get to keep your privilege. If you have power and money, you get to acquire more by virtue of the power and money that you already have. And I don't see either major party doing that. So it's great. So I think third parties are the way to go. And we've talked, like on the phone, we've talked about it 6 hours total. It just becomes this big, long conversation. And, we agree on everything that matters as far as I'm concerned. And it has been a little bit of a surprise to me to learn that of the environmental commitment on the part of some libertarians. So, and to talk about your attitudes toward the environment.
Well, fundamentally, what I find most critical is private property. I own myself, I own my, anatomy, I own the space I occupy. I'm a, huge advocate of, Lockean homestead theory and whatnot. And in order for me to have security in my bodily autonomy, in order for me to have security in my property, my home life, and all of the liberties that I espouse through libertarianism, I have to have a safe environment, right? If I own my property and my neighbor owns theirs, they can't just pollute mine. That's an infringement. That's force. That's aggression.
Yeah.
And when you have these governments or these corporations or, these bad actors throughout the world that are going through and infringing on your property rights, your rights of water, airspace, and soil, that's an initiation of war. That's an initiation of force. They're detrimenting your sustainability of your life, your lifestyle, and the whole of the world. Now, I think it impossible for everyone to be perfectly attuned with nature. Like, that is a hefty ambition. I hope we get there someday, right? That we can all live without imposing on one another. But we do have an obligation and a responsibility to minimize our impacts on our neighbors, especially those impacts that we make on them without their consent. And I see a lot of that non-consensual pollution coming on from, governments, corporations, and those entities. An example, because real quick, I brought up a concept of, like consensual and non-consensual pollution, right? If my neighbor invites me over for a barbecue, and there's a little bit of wood smoke going up in the air, and it's wafting over towards my property, well, I probably consented to that, and that's within reason. Now, the guy 3 blocks down who wasn't invited, who now has to smell the hot dogs, they might be upset that they weren't invited,
Right.
Or that they've got this smell wafting into their airspace, or this carbon going up in the air. And, that's where we just got to be good neighbors and try to minimize those impacts. Maybe they'll forgive us if it's just a little bit of a carbon going up, or maybe it's just that we forgot to invite them on that particular cookout. But it gets absurd when you get these massive corporate entities or government agencies that are dumping oil due to negligence into the Gulf of Mexico because they check their boxes of, well, we're, federally compliant. We can drill here. We can do what we want. So that's an example of inexcusable, non-consensual, just aggression coming from, government and their subsidiaries.
Right. Well, one thing we got going on now in the Ohio River Valley, no politicians aren't talking about this. The public doesn't know about it. Is that, they want to build this big petrochemical complex in the Ohio Valley, just like you have currently in Houston and in New Orleans. But, people don't know about it. And I see it as a form of aggression, making a profit, polluting the water, and, anyway, so that's one thing. Talk about the eminent domain issues that you've dealt with. What is it that you're trying to deal with in Bullitt County in terms of, what is the government or private entity is trying to do?
Well, so it's really hard to separate or call any of them a private entity when they receive these government grants and favors, when they receive additional funding or subsidization through the use of eminent domain. They are by that point an extension of the government. When they can initiate force against you with impunity to take your home at gunpoint. Fundamentally, eminent domain is the initiation of force to seize lands for what's considered public good. But the issue here is that they espouse that they're going to give you fair compensation, and yet your robber is the one who gets to determine what's fair to compensate you.
Right.
And then also they want to determine what public good is. And look at, for example, the little pink house decision, that was someone's residence, eminent domain for what was supposed to be public good. And yet 10 years past, it's still a vacant lot. So, I really recommend people check out that one in particular. But specifically what's been going on in Bullitt County is that we're kind of in between a rock and a hard spot, right? We've got Fort Knox on the western side of the county that has abused eminent domain for the public good, national defense for generations. We've got Louisville, who's, abused eminent domain for public utilities and the like, seizing people's ground without giving them fair market value for it. We've got even a history of being literally railroaded, as railroads do in fact run through my county. And now this new player in the eminent domain arena is Bourbon. It sounds absurd, but they say that, well, it's to the public good because this development of industry will increase the total value of the properties in the region and allow us to extract more from the residents via, through property tax, which is another absurdity. And so they want to run these utility lines saying that, this water line, this gas line, or what have you, is for the public good. And yet it's only accessible by these corporate players. And then they want to detriment the environment by paving off fields, which would work as water stores, and expediting the flow of water as rain runoff becomes more swift and severe. And then the bourbon industry as a whole is a horrible polluter for the amount of natural gas they burn and the amount of dumping they do in the local creeks.
Yeah, my understanding, Jim Beam is owned by Beam Suntory, which is, there's a Chicago holding company, and then there's a Japanese holding company. To me, when Japanese or Chinese or anybody else that's foreign own, when Japanese oligarchs own American properties, that might be a national security thing if we actually were concerned about national security. But more to the point, what concerns me is that any oligarchs can own property and then get to throw their weight around. And so, the idea that Jim Beam and LG&E, that the government should delegate the right of eminent domain to them, it doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense that their growth as a corporation should be seen as a public good. It's a private good, and it primarily benefits people that don't live in Bullitt County.
Yeah, yeah, and they're subjugating local residents for it. It's atrocious.
So one thing you told me about the Libertarian Party of Kentucky is that, well, I mean, I visited your office. You have a nice office
Thank
on
you.
the second floor of, what's the address?
It's 1015 South 4th Street in Louisville, Kentucky. It's the Pickrell and Craig building.
And one thing you're doing is you're wanting to collaborate with groups that may be of like mind, but in legislative research. So how's that going to work? I mean, I liked it when I heard you describe it, but it's hard for me to describe it.
Well, for example, not a lot of people read the bills. That's a good start. If the Green Party has 3 or 4 volunteers and the Libertarian Party has a couple of dozen, and other auxiliary organizations or marijuana advocacy groups or any issue voter, if any person wants to come out as we're combing through these bills and highlighting them, I might be going through one bill and say, Hart, I read something in here that I think might be of interest to you. And while you might not have the individual bandwidth to go through every single bill and law that's being proposed or going through, we can help highlight those things for one another. And we can trust in one another that we understand the goals and the principles that we each hold to share that information. And ultimately, it's the dissemination of that information to the population that is key. Because just because you and I know what's going on doesn't mean that the general populace has had the time to reap the benefit of us reading those bills. For example, if I read something about some sort of eminent domain case or corporate subsidy, you might also take offense at that particular instance, as they could be something like Jim Beam, who dumps in Long Lick Creek and has turned the water sludge. I know that's a pretty serious accusation, but I've seen it my whole life. I grew up down the river from them. My dad's told me many stories of how the river's flow has changed, how it's gone to a black tar at the bottom of it, how there's an oily sheen on the top of it, how it's eroded more and more the banks each year and the water's turned brown, that the little fish species and the clams and all of that native are being, and that all has to do with the development, because they don't do it responsibly. And there's definitely a way by which they could do it responsibly. I'm not opposed to innovation. I'm opposed to, subjugation and, destroying people's property and livelihoods down the river. But getting
the
back
thing
to,
is, a lot of water pollution and air pollution could be eliminated, but it would require an extra cost to the companies.
Yeah.
And that cost is justifiable if you consider that whatever cost they don't undertake is going to be shifted to us. So why should they be able to shift the cost onto us through the loss of ecological health of the creek, possible health problems that come from that? Why should they be able to shift that cost onto us? Any company that cannot be profitable and responsible at the same time doesn't deserve to be in business.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I completely oppose the concept of a limited liability corporation. That is a government favor bought for and a special privilege and a special merger of corporation and state. Unfortunately, that's the system our tax code requires a lot of people to operate under. But the concept as a whole has a particular word that starts with an F that it's pretty reminiscent of.
What's that?
Fascistic.
Okay, right. Yeah, fascism is like a marriage between corporations and government.
Yeah, and
according to the original fascist was Benito Mussolini, and that's what he said it was.
Yeah, he coined the term. He gets to define the term, and I will accept his definition of a horrible system that is sadly pretty prevalent in a lot of our lives.
Right. So what else you want to talk about?
Well, I guess I kind of derailed us from the whole talk of legislative research, but ultimately the purpose of that is just to highlight and educate and to make sure that we have a dedicated workspace.
Right. So
Um,
yeah, I'm excited about the possibility of like working with you as in a teamwork kind of situation, because for me to participate in trying to influence government at the state level, federal level, local level, it has to be a little bit fun,
mhm.
because if it's tedious, then if it's tedious, that's a problem. And then if you do something that's tedious and you don't feel like you're doing any good, you don't feel like you're making any changes, then that's just not something that people are going to do for very long. You're not going to have very many people doing it for very long. But if you can make it fun and engaging, and I mean, grab a beer and go over the whatever legislation is coming up, and get together from time to time and say, here's this and here's that, and we could work with this
Mhm.
person or group on this. So,
Yeah, I think that there's two states of mind that the current establishment wants you to hold, and that's either hate or apathy. And they have no tolerance for love of your fellow man. They've got no tolerance for cooperation or coordination. And I think that if we can make it fun, if we can come together, and you and I could probably debate socialism v capitalism and private property rights till we're red in the face and full of hate for one another. But at
that
the end of the day, it's
sounds like fun.
yeah, I mean, it could be fun. It depends on if you have that beer or not, and if I have some kombucha or tea or a whiskey or something. I actually don't drink a lot of carbonated stuff, but I'm like the one libertarian who really doesn't drink beer. It's
Hmm.
weird.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, I think we can make it fun, and by having an office where the libertarian can provide as a resource to organizations, like if the Constitution Party wants to come out, sit down and read a bill, go through it, come up with a plan to lobby, come up with a plan to educate the populace to the best of our ability. And that's not to say that the populace is uneducated. It's just that they're not aware of it because they've got more important things to them at the moment. And I don't fault them for it.
Right.
They've been told to look over here, not what the legislature's doing. And that ties into how they either want you to hate one another or to be apathetic to it entirely. And I think that,
Well, okay. So when I
yeah.
think of third party, legitimate third parties, I can't say this about every third party, but the ones that I know, we agree on a whole lot of stuff. And the populace agrees on a whole lot of stuff.
Mhm.
What we don't, what the populace don't agree with is the two major parties or the narrow interests of the very rich. And so, the last thing the ruling elites want is for us to work together on issues where we agree, which is a
Mhm.
lot of stuff. It's not that they want us to believe that you're either a Democrat or a Republican or you're uh, unengaged.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Ralph Nader has written at least one book on, I think one of his books is 17 Solutions, and the 17 solutions are areas that have majority support. So if we could organize around 17 or more issues on which we had majority support, one thing, we could change our country and the world. And also, we can count on the Democratic Party and the Republican Party fighting us every step of the way, and the corporate media fighting us every step of the way, because they are not for real. They are fake 110%. And that's all I have to say about that. Okay, not the Democratic voters or the Republican voters,
Yeah.
but when you
There's
get into the power structure, it is just endless corruption, grift, self-interest, and anything but the public interest.
Mhm. Yeah. Like I said, they want you to either hate one another or to be apathetic, and we need to show that there's more to it. We need to break away from their media, from their news cycles, things like that. I'm not telling people not to watch it, Just watch it and understand the context in which it exists. You need to listen to them. You need to listen to your neighbor, not block people out. Watch CNN, watch Fox, watch MSNBC, watch YouTube. Watch what you're doing right now. But also, read books. Find the historical context, right?
Right.
They don't want you to go back and read Common Sense or the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or the Articles of Confederation. They don't want you to know the context for which this nation was founded, or to look at the Anti-Federalist Papers and Lysander Spooner and some of the critiques of the contemporary of that time. They want you to just be right now, today, paycheck to paycheck, moment to moment, emotional reaction to emotional reaction.
Yeah, another thing that has surprised me a little bit, not too much, but a little bit, is that most libertarians are anti-war, which is where I'm coming from as well. And, I would have expected some of that. I would have expected a typical libertarian to be like a non-interventionist, which is maybe the same thing. I mean, if we got out of, intervention means aggression. If we got out of our wars of aggression, then there wouldn't be any left. We wouldn't have had a war since 1945 if we didn't have wars of aggression.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that, the libertarians are like 95% anti-war. And I'm sure that percentage would go down if you're talking about wars of self-defense. I mean, we're not talking about pacifism here. We are talking about getting out of these darn endless wars that have nothing to do with defense. They have nothing to do with freedom or liberty. They have nothing to do with high ideals. They have nothing to do with defending human rights.
Mm-hmm.
None of that. That's rhetoric, and it's completely opposite of the actual reality.
Well, one of the key things about it is the fact that we are subjugating our neighbors, taxing them, stealing their money, stealing their wages and their labor, and then shipping it off. We're spending $800,000 to blow up somebody who makes less than $8 a day. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous from a business perspective, which isn't even the correct perspective. The correct perspective is that it's absurd from a humanitarian perspective, that we're committing atrocities on the daily through taxation in order to fund.
We're in Afghanistan to help women. I mean, don't you know that, Randall? We're in Afghanistan because we care about women's rights.
It's going really well for it, isn't it?
Yeah. How's that going?
How's that going? Yeah. I think you'd be better off going over there with a stack of books. Walk over there with something about John Locke and natural rights. How every single person is created equal, that we have these inalienable human rights and liberties that are intrinsic to the fact that you are human, that man, woman, child, anything, everyone has these liberties, that even if they're not recognized by the government, they still exist, and that moral philosophy, it's valid, it stands. And I think that would be a lot more effective means than blowing up and bombing them, because every time you blow up one guy under false pretense, everybody that sees it is going to rally against you. And we have bred a culture of hate for generations over there against us. And we've got no one to blame but ourselves, because we are the aggressors in a lot of the circumstances around the world.
Mm-hmm. That's a great place to end, except I want to say, is there anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, I have no idea. I'll say nothing so we don't go another 3 hours.
Okay. Randall Daniel, head of the Kentucky Libertarian Party. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to have another conversation very soon. In fact, I'm going to end this recording, and then we're going to talk a little bit about climate change.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.